The security guard's hands trembled as he unzipped the 11-year-old's backpack. Inside, wrapped in a blue hoodie between math textbooks and a half-eaten sandwich, lay a loaded 9mm handgun. The principal's office erupted into chaos. Parents were called. Police arrived within minutes. And by 3 o'clock that autumn afternoon, Marcus Hale, son of tech mogul Richard Hale, was expelled from Westridge Preparatory Academy, the most exclusive private school in Chicago. But here's what nobody knew, what the news cameras didn't catch, what the emergency parent meeting never discussed. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The gun wasn't meant for other students. It was meant for Marcus himself. And the only person who understood why was a 42-year-old housekeeper named Rosa Martinez, who had been working in the Hale mansion for exactly 8 days. The Hale estate sat on 12 acres of pristine lakefront property north of Chicago, a sprawling modern fortress of glass and steel that had been featured in Architectural Digest 3 times. From the air, it looked like something from a science fiction film, all clean lines and impossible angles, surrounded by manicured lawns that stayed green even in October. Inside, the silence was suffocating. Richard Hale had purchased the property 4 years ago, right after his company went public and made him the youngest self-made billionaire in the Midwest. The house had 32 rooms, an indoor pool, a home theater, a wine cellar worth more than most people's houses, and a loneliness so profound it seemed to seep from the walls themselves. The master bedroom on the 3rd floor hadn't been used in 2 years, not since Catherine Hale died of ovarian cancer at 39. The door remained closed, locked from the outside, as if keeping it shut could somehow contain the grief that had shattered their family. Richard Hale was 41 years old and looked 50. His dark hair had gone silver at the temples. Deep lines creased his forehead. His suits, custom-tailored from Milan, hung slightly loose on a frame that had shed 20 pounds in 24 months. He rarely slept more than 4 hours a night. His days began at 5 in the morning with black coffee and financial reports, and ended sometime after midnight with whiskey and more financial reports, an endless cycle of numbers and strategies and acquisitions that kept his mind too busy to remember what his wife's laugh sounded like. His company, Hale Technologies, had revolutionized cloud computing infrastructure. He had offices in 15 countries. His face appeared regularly in Forbes and Fortune. Investors fought for his attention. Competitors feared him. And yet every morning when he looked in the mirror while knotting his tie, he saw a man who had failed at the only thing that truly mattered. His son Marcus was 11 years old, small for his age, with his mother's dark eyes and his father's sharp features. Before Catherine died, Marcus had been a bright, curious child who asked endless questions about how things worked, who built elaborate structures with Legos and dreamed of becoming an engineer like his father. He played soccer. He had friends. He smiled easily and laughed often, a light, bubbling sound that filled whatever room he entered. But the cancer had taken 18 months to kill Catherine Hale, 18 months of hospitals and treatments and false hopes and devastating setbacks, and somewhere in that terrible passage of time, Marcus had stopped being a child. He watched his mother waste away, saw her lose her hair, heard her cry at night when she thought no one was listening. He sat beside her hospital bed doing homework while machines beeped and nurses whispered. He held her hand during the final week, when she could barely speak, when her skin had turned the color of old paper. And on the morning she died, something inside Marcus died too. The funeral was held on a gray November day. 300 people attended. Business associates. Family friends. People Richard barely knew. Marcus sat in the front row of the church in a black suit that was slightly too large, staring straight ahead, his face blank, his eyes dry. He didn't cry during the service. He didn't cry at the cemetery. He didn't cry that night or the next day or any day after. He simply stopped feeling, as if his heart had been replaced with something hard and cold and impenetrable. Richard told himself this was normal, that grief took different forms, that his son needed time. But time only made things worse. Marcus began having nightmares, waking up screaming about darkness and falling and being unable to breathe. He stopped eating properly. He lost weight. Dark circles appeared under his eyes. At school, his grades plummeted. He stopped turning in homework. He sat alone at lunch. When teachers tried to talk to him, he stared past them as if they weren't there. Other children avoided him, unsettled by his silence, by the way he seemed to exist in some separate dimension of misery they couldn't understand. Richard hired therapists. The first one, Dr. Palmer, was a kindly woman in her 60s who specialized in childhood grief. Marcus sat in her office for 45 minutes every Tuesday afternoon and said absolutely nothing. Not a single word. He stared at the wall while she asked gentle questions, while she showed him pictures and games meant to help children express difficult emotions, while she tried every technique in her considerable arsenal. After 3 months, she told Richard that she couldn't help a patient who wouldn't speak. The second therapist was younger, more modern in his approach. Dr. Chen believed in art therapy, in letting children express through drawing what they couldn't say in words. Marcus drew the same picture over and over. A house. A tree. A sun. Simple, childish images rendered in flat, lifeless strokes. When Dr. Chen asked what the pictures meant, Marcus remained silent. When he tried different approaches, different techniques, Marcus simply stared at him with those dark, empty eyes. After 6 months, Dr. Chen also admitted defeat. The third therapist specialized in trauma. Dr. Reeves had worked with children who had survived wars, abuse, unspeakable horrors. Surely she could reach one grieving boy. But Marcus defeated her too. He sat in her office, session after session, a small statue of a child, present in body but absent in every other way. Dr. Reeves tried medication. She prescribed antidepressants, anti-anxiety pills, sleep aids. Marcus took them dutifully, but nothing changed. The nightmares continued. The silence deepened. After 8 months, even Dr. Reeves had to acknowledge that whatever wall Marcus had built around himself was stronger than any tool she possessed to break through it. Richard felt helpless in a way that no amount of money or power could fix. He could acquire companies, could negotiate billion-dollar deals, could convince boards and investors and politicians, but he couldn't reach his own son. The distance between them grew wider every day. They lived in the same enormous house but rarely saw each other. Richard left for work before Marcus woke up. He came home after Marcus had gone to bed. On weekends, Richard worked from his home office while Marcus wandered the empty halls like a ghost, present but not really there. The staff noticed, of course. Mrs. Chen, the housekeeper who had been with the family since Marcus was born, tried to engage the boy. She baked his favorite cookies, chocolate chip with walnuts. Marcus ate one to be polite, then left the rest untouched. She asked about school, about his classes, about anything she could think of. Marcus answered in monosyllables or not at all. Eventually, even Mrs. Chen's warm persistence faded into worried silence. Thomas, the driver, a retired military man in his 60s, attempted a different approach. He told Marcus stories about his own service, about overcoming hard times, about the importance of resilience. Marcus listened politely and said nothing. James, the groundskeeper, invited Marcus to help with the gardens, thinking physical work might provide an outlet. Marcus declined with a small shake of his head. One by one, the staff learned to leave the boy alone, to let him drift through the house undisturbed, a small shadow moving through rooms filled with expensive furniture and terrible silence. Westridge Preparatory Academy had been Catherine's choice. She believed in rigorous academics combined with arts and athletics, in small class sizes and individual attention, in building not just intelligence but character. Marcus had thrived there, once. But after her death, school became another battlefield. He stopped participating in class. He turned in blank tests. When teachers called on him, he stared at his desk until they moved on to someone else. Other students whispered about him. Some tried to be kind, inviting him to join their games at recess. Marcus declined. Some were cruel, calling him weird, making jokes about the sad kid whose mom died. Marcus didn't react. He simply endured, day after day, moving through the hallways like someone underwater, everything muted and distant and unreal. His teachers were concerned. They called Richard, left messages, sent emails. Richard responded with apologies and promises that things would improve. They never did. By 5th grade, Marcus had no friends, failing grades, and a reputation as the strange, silent boy who sat alone and never spoke. The violence started small. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. A classmate made a joke about Marcus's mother. Marcus didn't say anything. He simply walked over and pushed the boy into a locker. Hard. The boy's nose bled. Marcus was suspended for 3 days. Richard was called to the school. The principal, Dr. Whitmore, a stern woman with sharp eyes and no patience for disruption, told Richard that his son needed serious intervention. Richard nodded, promised to handle it, and hired another therapist. 2 months later, Marcus got into a fight during gym class. Another student said something, nobody was quite sure what, and Marcus attacked him. It took 2 teachers to pull them apart. Marcus's knuckles were bloody. The other boy had a black eye. Another suspension. Another meeting. Dr. Whitmore's patience was wearing thin. She spoke about the school's zero-tolerance policy, about the need to protect all students, about how Marcus's behavior was becoming a serious problem. Richard listened with his jaw clenched, feeling the weight of his failures pressing down on him. He increased Marcus's therapy sessions. He hired a behavioral specialist. Nothing changed. The breaking point came on a Tuesday in October. Marcus had been back at school for a week after his latest suspension. The day started normally, or as normal as things ever were. Marcus arrived with Thomas, walked into the building with his backpack, went to his first period class. He sat at his desk. He stared at the whiteboard. He said nothing. During second period, English class, they were discussing a novel about a family dealing with loss. The teacher, Mr. Patterson, a young man fresh from graduate school who believed in the power of literature to heal, asked students to share their thoughts about how the characters coped with grief. Several students raised their hands. Mr. Patterson, meaning well but catastrophically misjudging the situation, called on Marcus. He thought perhaps this was an opportunity, a chance for the boy to finally open up in a safe environment about his own experiences. Marcus said nothing. Mr. Patterson tried again, gently encouraging, saying there were no wrong answers, that sharing could help. Marcus continued staring at his desk. Then a voice from the back of the classroom. Tyler Bennett, a stocky boy with too much confidence and too little empathy, the kind of kid who had never experienced real pain and couldn't imagine why anyone else's suffering mattered. "Hey Marcus," Tyler said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "maybe your mom died because she was tired of having such a freak for a son." The classroom went silent. Mr. Patterson started to respond, to discipline Tyler, but he never got the chance. Marcus stood up. His chair clattered backward. And for the first time in 2 years, emotion showed on his face. Pure, absolute rage. He walked toward Tyler with terrifying calm. Tyler, realizing he might have gone too far, stood up too, trying to laugh it off, to act like it was just a joke. Marcus didn't hesitate. He threw a punch that connected with Tyler's jaw. Tyler stumbled back. Marcus followed, hitting him again and again, silent and methodical and completely out of control. Other students screamed. Mr. Patterson rushed over, grabbing Marcus, pulling him back. It took another teacher, Mr. Rodriguez from next door, to help restrain him. Marcus fought against them, not saying a word, his face twisted with something beyond anger, beyond pain, something primal and devastating. When they finally got him to the principal's office, when the adrenaline faded and he sat in the chair across from Dr. Whitmore's desk, the rage disappeared. His face went blank again. Empty. And that's when security found the gun. Marcus had taken it from his father's study 3 days earlier. Richard kept a small pistol in his desk drawer, a precaution he'd taken after Catherine died, though he'd never really considered why or what he thought he might need to protect himself from. It was registered, legal, usually locked. But Richard had been careless lately, distracted by work, by his own grief, by the endless demands of a life he no longer had any enthusiasm for living. The gun had been left unlocked. Marcus knew where it was. He'd seen his father put it away months ago. And one night, while Richard worked late at the office, Marcus went into the study, opened the drawer, and took it. He didn't really have a plan, not a clear one. He just knew that the pain was too much, that every day was unbearable, that the darkness inside him was growing until it felt like it would swallow him whole. He thought about his mother. He thought about how much easier everything would be if he just stopped existing. He wrapped the gun in his hoodie. He put it in his backpack. And he carried it to school, day after day, not sure when or if he'd use it, just knowing that having it there made him feel like he had some control, some choice, some way out of the suffocating misery that had become his entire world. When Dr. Whitmore saw the gun, her face went white. She called security immediately. She called the police. She called Richard. Within 20 minutes, the school was in lockdown. Police officers swarmed the building. Parents received emergency texts. News vans appeared outside the gates. Marcus sat in the principal's office with 2 police officers standing nearby, his hands folded in his lap, his face expressionless. He didn't resist. He didn't explain. He just sat there, a small boy in a uniform that was slightly too big, looking like he'd already disappeared even though he was right there in front of them. When Richard arrived, his face was ashen. He barely recognized the scene, the police cars, the crowds, the reporters already shouting questions. He was rushed inside through a side entrance. In Dr. Whitmore's office, he saw his son sitting there, small and lost and so far away. Richard's knees almost gave out. "What were you thinking?" he asked, his voice breaking. Marcus looked at him. For just a moment, something flickered in those dark eyes. Something that looked like an apology, or maybe a plea, or maybe just exhaustion. Then it was gone. Marcus said nothing. The police were kind, relatively speaking. They understood this wasn't a school shooting scenario, wasn't terrorism or premeditated violence against others. This was a deeply troubled child who had brought a weapon to school but hadn't actually threatened anyone with it. Still, protocols had to be followed. Marcus was taken to the station. He was questioned, gently, by a detective who specialized in juvenile cases. Marcus didn't speak. A social worker was called in. Child Protective Services got involved. There were discussions about psychiatric evaluation, about whether Marcus was a danger to himself or others, about what happens to 11-year-old boys who bring guns to school. Richard sat in a waiting room for 6 hours, his head in his hands, his entire world crumbling around him. Eventually, they released Marcus into his father's custody with the understanding that he would receive immediate psychiatric care and that charges might still be filed depending on the evaluation. The expulsion was immediate and absolute. Dr. Whitmore made that clear. Westridge Preparatory Academy could not and would not tolerate weapons on campus, regardless of circumstances, regardless of the child's history or mental state. Marcus was banned from the property. His belongings would be mailed to him. The other parents were already calling for his removal anyway, frightened and angry, demanding to know how this could happen, insisting their children's safety was paramount. Richard didn't fight it. What could he say? His son had brought a loaded gun to school. There was no defense for that. No explanation that would satisfy frightened parents or school board members or the reporters who were already writing headlines about the troubled son of a billionaire. Richard took Marcus home. They drove in silence, Thomas at the wheel, Richard and Marcus in the back seat, an ocean of distance between them despite sitting inches apart. Marcus stared out the window. Richard wanted to say something, wanted to reach across that impossible gulf and somehow connect with his son, but he had no idea where to start. Every word that came to mind felt inadequate, hollow, useless. So he said nothing. and the silence grew heavier with every mile. The mansion felt even emptier when they returned. Richard dismissed Thomas and told him to take the rest of the day off. He walked Marcus upstairs to his room, a large space filled with toys and books and everything a child could want except the one thing that mattered. "Stay here," Richard said, his voice exhausted. "We'll talk later. I need to make some calls." Marcus nodded once and went inside, closing the door quietly behind him. Richard stood in the hallway for a long moment, staring at that closed door, feeling more helpless than he'd ever felt in his entire life. Then he went to his study and started making calls. He called lawyers. He called psychiatrists. He called a crisis management firm that specialized in helping high-profile individuals navigate scandals. Everyone had advice. Everyone had opinions. Nobody had answers. The news was already spreading. By evening, it would be everywhere. Billionaire's son expelled for bringing gun to school. The troubled child of tech mogul Richard Hale. The story wrote itself, a perfect mixture of wealth, tragedy, and shocking behavior that media outlets loved. Richard's phone rang constantly. His PR team. His board of directors. Friends who weren't really friends calling to offer support that felt more like curiosity. He ignored most of them. He poured himself a drink. Then another. By the time the sun set, he was sitting alone in his study in the dark, the weight of his failures crushing down on him. The staff was in shock. Mrs. Chen, who had known Marcus since he was born, couldn't believe what she'd heard on the news. Sweet Marcus? The boy who used to help her bake cookies? The child who said please and thank you and once drew her a picture of flowers for her birthday? She sat in the kitchen with tears running down her face, wondering how things had gotten so bad without anyone noticing, without anyone doing something to help. Thomas told her about the drive home, about the terrible silence, about how small Marcus looked in that back seat. James, the groundskeeper, mentioned that he'd seen Marcus walking the property late at night sometimes, when he thought everyone was asleep, just wandering aimlessly through the gardens like a ghost. They all felt guilty, in their own ways, for not seeing, for not doing more, for letting that little boy drift so far away that he'd reached for a gun as his only answer. That night, Marcus lay in his bed staring at the ceiling. His room was dark except for the faint glow of a nightlight he was too old for but couldn't bring himself to turn off. He thought about what he'd done, about the gun, about Tyler's face, about his father's expression when he saw the police cars. He thought about his mother. He wondered what she would think if she could see him now. He wondered if she was disappointed. He wondered if she was sad. He wondered if wherever she was better off not having to watch her son become whatever he was becoming. The tears came then, silent and hot, sliding down his face in the darkness. He didn't make a sound. He just cried until there was nothing left, until exhaustion finally pulled him into a restless sleep filled with dreams of falling in darkness and voices calling his name that he could never quite reach. Richard didn't sleep at all. He sat in his study drinking whiskey and staring at a photograph on his desk. It was from 6 years ago, taken at Marcus's 5th birthday party. Catherine was laughing, her arms around Marcus, both of them covered in cake frosting. Marcus was grinning, that big, genuine smile that showed all his teeth. Richard was in the background, slightly out of focus, but you could see he was smiling too. They looked happy. They had been happy, once upon a time, before cancer and death and grief had torn everything apart. Richard picked up the photo, his hand shaking, and for the first time since Catherine's funeral, he allowed himself to really cry. Not the silent tears he'd shed alone in his car or late at night when he thought no one could hear. This was deeper, rawer, the kind of sobbing that comes from a place beyond words. He cried for his wife. He cried for his son. He cried for himself, for the man he used to be, for the father he'd failed to become. And when the tears finally stopped and the first light of dawn began to seep through the windows, Richard made a decision. Something had to change. He couldn't do this alone anymore. He couldn't fix Marcus with money or doctors or any of the tools that had always solved his problems before. He needed help. Real help. The kind that didn't come from credentials or reputation, but from something deeper, something human. The next morning, Richard called an agency he'd never used before. Not the high-end service that provided his usual staff, the kind of agency that vetted candidates extensively and charged premium rates for experienced professionals. This was different, a smaller operation that focused on placing domestic workers from immigrant communities, people who needed jobs and were willing to work hard for modest wages. Richard explained his situation, vaguely. He needed someone to help around the house. Someone patient. Someone kind. Someone who could start immediately. The woman on the phone, Mrs. Delgado, who ran the agency, asked a few questions. She sensed there was more to the story but didn't press. She had someone in mind, she said. A woman who had just registered with the agency last week. Experienced with children. Good references from her previous position. Available immediately. Her name was Rosa Martinez. Rosa Martinez was 42 years old and had been in the United States for 15 years. She'd come from Mexico City with her husband and their 2 children, seeking better opportunities, the same story shared by millions of families. Her husband, Miguel, worked construction. Their daughter, Elena, was 19 and studying nursing at community college. Their son, David, was 17 and working part-time while finishing high school. They lived in a small apartment in a working-class neighborhood on the south side of Chicago, a place where the buildings were old but the community was strong, where neighbors knew each other's names and helped when times were hard. Rosa had worked as a housekeeper for 10 years, first for a family in the suburbs, then for an elderly woman who had recently passed away. She needed a new position. Money was tight. Elena's tuition was expensive. David wanted to attend college too. Miguel's work was seasonal, slower in winter. So when Mrs. Delgado called about a position at a large estate north of the city, Rosa said yes without hesitation. She didn't know anything about Richard Hale or his company. She didn't follow business news or read about billionaires. She knew the job paid well, better than her previous position. She knew it was full-time, 5 days a week, with the possibility of living on the property if needed. That was enough. Mrs. Delgado gave her the address and told her to arrive Monday morning at 8. She mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that the family had recently experienced some difficulties. There was a young son who might need extra attention. Rosa listened carefully. She'd worked with difficult children before. It didn't frighten her. When Monday morning arrived, Rosa took 2 buses and a train to reach the estate. The journey took nearly 2 hours. She arrived 15 minutes early, standing at the iron gates, looking up at the massive house beyond. She'd worked in nice homes before, but nothing like this. This was something else entirely. Wealth on a scale she could barely comprehend. She pressed the intercom button. A voice answered. She gave her name. The gates swung open silently. Mrs. Chen met her at the front door. The older woman looked exhausted, her eyes red-rimmed, her usual warmth replaced by wariness. She showed Rosa around quickly, pointing out the rooms that needed cleaning, the kitchen, the laundry facilities. She explained the family's basic routine, or what passed for routine in a house where everything had fallen apart. Mr. Hale left early for work, usually before 7. Marcus would be home, obviously, since he was no longer attending school. Mrs. Chen's voice caught slightly when she said this, but she didn't elaborate. Rosa noticed but didn't ask questions. It wasn't her place. Not yet. Mrs. Chen showed her Marcus's room last. The door was closed. She knocked softly. No answer. She opened it a crack. Inside, Rosa could see a boy lying on his bed, facing the wall. Marcus, Mrs. Chen called softly, this is Rosa. She's going to be helping around the house. The boy didn't move. Didn't acknowledge them. Mrs. Chen sighed and closed the door. He's been like this since Tuesday, she said quietly. Won't eat. Won't talk. Just stays in his room. Rosa looked at the closed door for a long moment. She'd seen grief before, in many forms. Her own mother had died when Rosa was 16. She remembered that hollow feeling, that sense that the world had lost all color and meaning. She remembered wanting to disappear, to stop existing, because existing hurt too much. And looking at that closed door, at the small boy hiding behind it, Rosa felt something shift inside her. This wasn't just a job. This was a child in pain. Real, devastating pain. The kind that didn't heal on its own. The kind that needed something more than time or money or professional expertise. It needed human connection. It needed someone willing to sit with the darkness and not look away. Rosa had no credentials. She'd never studied psychology or child development. But she'd raised 2 children of her own. She'd survived loss and hardship. She knew something about pain and healing that couldn't be learned from books. She set down her bag and rolled up her sleeves. "All right," she said to Mrs. Chen. "Show me what needs to be done." The first few days, Rosa simply worked. She cleaned. She did laundry. She organized. The house was immaculate already, maintained by a professional staff, but there were small things that had been neglected. Dust in corners. Windows that needed washing. Closets that needed sorting. Rosa worked quietly and efficiently, learning the rhythms of the house, observing without interfering. She saw Richard leave every morning, his face drawn, his shoulders hunched like he was carrying an impossible weight. She saw Marcus's door stay closed hour after hour. She heard Mrs. Chen knock at mealtimes, trying to coax the boy to eat. Sometimes Marcus would open the door and take the tray. Sometimes he wouldn't. Rosa said nothing. She just watched and waited, patient as stone. On the 3rd day, she was cleaning the hallway near Marcus's room when she heard something. A sound so faint she almost missed it. Crying. Very quiet, very controlled, the kind of crying someone does when they're trying desperately not to be heard. Rosa stopped what she was doing. She stood there holding her dust cloth, listening to that heartbreaking sound. Every instinct told her to knock on the door, to go in, to try to comfort him. But she knew better. You couldn't force comfort on someone who wasn't ready. You couldn't make someone trust you just because you wanted to help. Trust had to be earned, slowly, carefully, with patience and consistency in time. So Rosa waited. She finished cleaning the hallway. She moved on to the next room. But that sound stayed with her, echoing in her mind long after it had stopped. That night, Rosa rode the long journey home, the buses and train filled with tired people heading back to their own lives. She thought about Marcus. About that terrible, quiet crying. About the closed door and the silent boy behind it. When she got home, her own children were there. Elena studying at the kitchen table. David watching television. Miguel cooking dinner. Her family. Warm and present and alive. Rosa hugged them both, maybe holding on a little longer than usual. Elena looked up surprised. "You okay, Mama?" Rosa nodded, not trusting her voice. "Just grateful," she said. "That's all. Just grateful." On Thursday, something changed. Rosa was in the kitchen preparing lunch, simple food that might tempt a child who wasn't eating. Soup. Fresh bread. Nothing fancy, just warm and comforting. She was slicing vegetables when she sensed someone watching her. She looked up. Marcus stood in the doorway. He was thin, painfully so, his school uniform replaced by sweatpants and an oversized t-shirt. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. His hair was uncombed. He looked fragile, like something that might break if touched too hard. Rosa didn't react with surprise or excessive enthusiasm. She just smiled, small and genuine, and went back to her cutting board. "Hello," she said softly. "Are you hungry?" Marcus didn't answer. He stood there, uncertain, like a wild animal considering whether to approach or flee. Rosa continued cooking, giving him space, not pressuring. After a long moment, Marcus took one step into the kitchen. Then another. He sat down at the island, far from where Rosa worked, but in the room at least. Present. Rosa felt her heart ache but kept her expression calm. She continued chopping vegetables, the rhythmic sound of the knife filling the silence. "Would you like to help me?" she asked, not looking at him directly. "Sometimes keeping your hands busy makes things feel better." Marcus said nothing. But he didn't leave. That was something. Rosa slid a small cutting board across the counter toward him, along with a butter knife and a soft tomato. "You can cut this if you want," she said. "No pressure. Just if you feel like it." For several minutes, nothing happened. Marcus stared at the tomato. Rosa continued with her own work, humming softly, a song her mother used to sing when Rosa was small. A Mexican lullaby about stars and dreams and safety. Then, so quietly she almost missed it, Marcus picked up the knife. He began to cut the tomato, slowly, carefully. His hands shook slightly. Rosa didn't comment. She just kept working beside him, two people sharing a task, nothing more. When the soup was ready, Rosa poured 2 bowls. She set one in front of Marcus and kept one for herself. She sat down, leaving space between them, and began to eat. Marcus looked at his bowl. He picked up the spoon. He took one small sip. Then another. He didn't finish the soup, but he ate maybe a third of it, which was more than he'd eaten in days. When he stood up to leave, Rosa spoke softly. "Thank you for helping me. You're good at this." Marcus paused at the doorway. He didn't turn around. But he nodded, just once, barely perceptible. Then he disappeared back upstairs. Mrs. Chen, who had watched this entire interaction from the adjacent room, came into the kitchen with tears in her eyes. "How did you do that?" she asked. "He hasn't come out of his room in days." Rosa shrugged, gathering the bowls. "I didn't do anything. I just gave him space to choose." Mrs. Chen shook her head in wonder. "The professionals couldn't reach him. The therapists. The doctors. 3 of them. And you got him to eat soup." Rosa looked toward the stairs where Marcus had disappeared. "That boy doesn't need more professionals," she said quietly. "He needs someone who will sit with his pain without trying to fix it. Who will just be there, steady and patient, until he's ready to come back." Mrs. Chen wiped her eyes. "I hope you're right. I hope it's not too late." Rosa thought about the gun, about what Mrs. Chen had whispered to her yesterday, about what had really happened at that school. She understood now why Marcus's door stayed closed. Why the house felt haunted despite its modern beauty. This wasn't just grief. This was a child who had lost hope entirely. A child who had looked into the darkness and decided he'd rather disappear than continue suffering. But today, he'd come downstairs. Today, he'd cut a tomato. Today, he'd eaten soup. Small things. Tiny things. But sometimes the journey back to life begins with steps so small you can barely see them. And Rosa was patient. She could wait. The following Monday marked 2 weeks since Marcus had been expelled from Westridge Preparatory. The news cycle had moved on to other scandals, other tragedies, though the damage to the Hale family's reputation lingered like smoke after a fire. Richard's board had held an emergency meeting. Several investors had expressed concerns. His company's stock had dipped 3%, not catastrophic but notable enough to make the financial press take notice. Richard sat through conference calls where people pretended to care about his well-being while really asking whether his personal situation would affect quarterly earnings. He assured them it wouldn't. He lied smoothly, the way successful men learn to lie, with confidence and just enough detail to sound believable. But at night, alone in his study, Richard knew the truth. Everything was affecting everything. His focus was scattered. His decision-making was slower. He couldn't remember the last time he'd felt truly present in any meeting or conversation. That morning, Richard came downstairs earlier than usual. He had a video conference with the Tokyo office at 6:30 and needed coffee before facing a screen full of executives who would be watching his every gesture for signs of weakness. He was surprised to find the kitchen already occupied. Rosa stood at the stove, stirring something in a pot, the morning light streaming through the windows and catching in her dark hair, which she wore pulled back in a simple bun. She looked up when he entered and offered a small nod of acknowledgement. "Good morning, Mr. Hale. Would you like some coffee?" Richard paused. In the 2 weeks Rosa had been working there, they'd barely exchanged more than brief pleasantries. He typically left before the household truly woke, and when he returned late at night, the staff had already gone home. He knew her name because Mrs. Chen had told him. He knew she'd been hired to help with general housekeeping. Beyond that, she was just another face in a house full of people he paid to maintain his life while he focused on work. "Yes, thank you," Richard said, loosening his tie slightly. He sat at the kitchen island, the same place where Marcus had sat days ago cutting that tomato, though Richard didn't know about that moment. Rosa poured coffee into a mug, added a splash of cream without asking, remembering from previous mornings when she'd prepared his cup and left it in the study. She set it before him along with a small plate containing fresh pastries. "You should eat something," she said simply. "Big day ahead." Richard looked at the pastries, some kind of Mexican sweet bread he didn't recognize. He wasn't hungry. He was never hungry anymore. But something about the directness of her statement, the lack of deference or nervousness, made him pick one up and take a bite. It was good. Surprisingly good. Better than the expensive pastries from the French bakery that Mrs. Chen usually ordered. "Did you make these?" he asked. Rosa nodded, returning to her pot. "Conscious. My mother's recipe. She taught me when I was younger than your son." Richard felt something twist in his chest at the mention of Marcus. He took another bite, chewing slowly. "They're excellent. Thank you." Rosa stirred whatever she was cooking, the kitchen filling with the scent of cinnamon and vanilla. She didn't speak, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was simply there, a shared space that didn't demand anything from either of them. After a moment, Richard found himself asking a question he hadn't planned to ask. "How is he?" "Marcus, I mean. Have you seen him?" Rosa glanced over her shoulder. Her expression was difficult to read, neither pitying nor judgmental. "I've seen him a few times. He came to the kitchen last week. We made soup together." Richard's hand froze halfway to his mouth. "He came downstairs? To the kitchen?" Rosa nodded. "He helped me cut vegetables. Not much, but something. He ate a little too." Richard set down his coffee cup, staring at this woman he barely knew. The therapists couldn't get Marcus to speak a single word in months of sessions. The school counselors had given up. Even Mrs. Chen, who had known Marcus since birth, couldn't coax him out of his room. And this housekeeper, this woman who'd been in their home for 2 weeks, had gotten his son to come downstairs and eat soup? "How?" Richard asked, his voice rough with something between hope and disbelief. Rosa turned off the stove and faced him fully. Her eyes were dark brown, steady, containing a depth of understanding that came from experience rather than education. "I didn't try to make him do anything," she said. "I didn't ask questions or push him to talk. I just let him know he was welcome in the space. That if he wanted company, I was there. If he wanted silence, that was fine too. No pressure. No expectations. Just presence." Richard felt something crack inside his chest. It sounded so simple. So obvious. Why hadn't he thought of that? Why had he kept trying to fix Marcus with therapists and medication and solutions, when maybe all his son needed was someone who would just be there without demanding anything in return? "Because you're scared," Rosa said softly, as if reading his thoughts. "When we're scared of losing someone, we try too hard. We push when we should wait. We talk when we should listen. It's not your fault, Mr. Hale. It's just what fear does to love." Richard looked at this woman, really looked at her for the first time. She wore simple clothes, a plain shirt and jeans, an apron tied around her waist. No makeup. No jewelry except for a thin gold wedding band. She looked tired, the kind of tired that comes from years of hard work and long commutes and constant worry about money. But there was something in her eyes, something solid and unshakable, like bedrock beneath shifting sand. "Who are you?" Richard asked quietly. Rosa smiled faintly. "Just someone who has survived loss. Who knows what it feels like to want to disappear. Who understands that sometimes the only way through darkness is to stop running from it and learn to sit in it until your eyes adjust." Richard's phone buzzed with a reminder about his video conference. He glanced at it, then back at Rosa. "Thank you," he said. "For what you're doing for Marcus. For what you just said to me." Rosa shrugged, turning back to the stove. "I'm just doing my job, Mr. Hale. But if I may say something?" Richard nodded. "Your son doesn't need you to fix him. He needs you to be his father. That means being present even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." Richard left for his study carrying those words like stones in his pocket. During his video conference, he was distracted, his mind wandering back to the kitchen, to Rosa's steady voice, to the revelation that Marcus had come downstairs. When the meeting ended, instead of immediately diving into the next task, Richard did something he hadn't done in months. He walked upstairs to Marcus's room. He stood outside the closed door, his hand raised to knock, heart pounding. He remembered Rosa's words. No pressure. No expectations. Just presence. He lowered his hand. He didn't knock. He simply sat down on the floor in the hallway, his back against the wall opposite Marcus's door, and waited. He didn't know what he was waiting for. He just knew he needed to be there. To be close, even if his son didn't know it. Even if nothing came of it. After 20 minutes, Richard had to return to work. But before he left, he spoke quietly toward the door. "Marcus, it's Dad. I'm here if you need me. I'll always be here." No response came from inside. Richard hadn't expected one. But he felt marginally better having said it. Having tried, in his clumsy way, to bridge that impossible distance. That afternoon, Rosa was folding laundry in the utility room when Marcus appeared. He stood in the doorway much like he had before, hesitant, testing the waters. Rosa didn't stop what she was doing. She simply acknowledged him with a glance and a small smile. "Hello, Marcus. How are you today?" The boy didn't answer. He stepped into the room and sat on a stool in the corner, drawing his knees up to his chest, making himself small. Rosa continued folding, the soft sounds of fabric rustling filling the space between them. After several minutes of silence, Marcus spoke. His voice was rusty, barely above a whisper. "Why aren't you scared of me?" Rosa paused, a towel half folded in her hands. She considered the question carefully. "Why would I be scared of you?" Marcus hugged his knees tighter. "I brought a gun to school. Everyone else is scared. They think I'm dangerous." Rosa set down the towel and turned to face him fully. She didn't move closer, respecting his space. "I don't think you're dangerous, Marcus. I think you're hurting. There's a difference." Marcus looked at her with those dark, wounded eyes. "How do you know I wasn't going to hurt someone?" Rosa was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that no therapist had dared to say, something honest and direct that cut through all the careful professional language. "Were you?" Marcus's eyes filled with tears. "No," he whispered. "I just wanted the pain to stop. I wanted to make it all stop." Rosa nodded slowly. "I understand." The boy looked startled. "You do?" Rosa sat down on the floor, her back against the washing machine, making herself lower than him, less threatening. "When I was 17, my father died," she said quietly. "Heart attack. Sudden. One day he was there, making jokes at dinner. The next day he was gone. My mother fell apart. I had 3 younger siblings. Suddenly I had to be the adult, had to take care of everyone, had to pretend I was okay when I wasn't okay at all. And one night, I stood on a bridge over a highway and thought about jumping. Just for a moment. Just long enough to understand how tempting it is to make the pain stop. Marcus stared at her. What stopped you? Rosa smiled sadly. My little sister. She was 8. She'd drawn me a picture that day, a stick figure family with everyone smiling. She'd written "I love Rosa" at the top in crooked letters. I had it in my pocket. I took it out and looked at it on that bridge, and I thought about how she would feel if I jumped. How confused she would be. How much it would hurt her. And I realized that ending my pain would just pass it on to someone else. So I went home. Marcus processed this information. His voice was small when he spoke again. Did it get better? Did the pain stop? Rosa considered how to answer honestly. It changed. It became something I could carry instead of something that was crushing me. But it took time. And it took letting people help me, even when I didn't want help. Even when I was angry at the world for taking my father away. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked, Did you tell anyone? About the bridge? Rosa shook her head. Not until many years later. I was ashamed. I thought it meant I was weak or broken. But now I know it just meant I was human. That I was facing something too big to handle alone. Why are you telling me this? Marcus asked. Because I want you to know you're not alone. That what you're feeling, as terrible as it is, doesn't make you bad or damaged or unfixable. It makes you someone who has experienced profound loss and doesn't know how to survive it yet. Yet. That word hung in the air between them. Marcus wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. Everyone thinks I'm crazy. The doctors. The teachers. Even Dad, probably. Rosa shook her head firmly. Your father doesn't think you're crazy. He thinks he's failed you. He's terrified of losing you the way he lost your mother. Fear makes people do strange things. Makes them distant when they want to be close. Makes them silent when they should speak. Marcus looked at her with something like wonder. How do you know all this? Rosa smiled. Because I've lived long enough to recognize pain in all its forms. And because I see the way your father looks at your door when he thinks no one's watching. Like a man staring at something precious that's slipping away and he doesn't know how to hold on. That evening, something unprecedented happened. Marcus came downstairs for dinner. Not to the kitchen where he'd shared soup with Rosa days before, but to the actual dining room where the family used to eat together before Catherine died, before everything fell apart. The table was enormous, designed to seat 12, though these days it only saw use when Richard had business dinners, which was rare. Rosa had prepared a simple meal, nothing fancy. Roasted chicken. Rice. Vegetables. She'd set 3 places at one end of the long table, close together, intimate despite the grandeur of the room. Richard arrived home at 7, earlier than usual, having left the office when Rosa texted him something she probably shouldn't have texted an employer but felt compelled to anyway. Your son is waiting for you. Come home. When Richard walked into the dining room and saw Marcus sitting at the table, actually sitting there at a place setting with a napkin in his lap, his face went pale. He looked at Rosa, who stood near the kitchen door, her expression calm and encouraging. Then he looked at his son. Marcus didn't make eye contact. He stared at his empty plate, hands folded in his lap, looking like he might bolt at any moment. Richard approached slowly, carefully, like someone trying not to startle a deer. He sat down across from Marcus, his throat tight. Hi, he said quietly. His voice cracked. I'm glad you're here. Marcus said nothing. Rosa brought out the food, serving them both, her movements efficient and unobtrusive. She started to leave, to give them privacy, but Richard spoke. Please stay. Join us. Rosa hesitated. Mr. Hale, I don't think that's appropriate. I'm staff. Richard shook his head. Tonight, your family. Please. Rosa saw something in his eyes, a desperate plea that had nothing to do with propriety and everything to do with needing an anchor, someone who could navigate the emotional minefield of this dinner when he had no idea how. She nodded and sat down at the third place setting. They ate in silence at first. The only sounds were silverware against plates and the distant hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. It should have been awkward. It should have been unbearable. But somehow, with Rosa there as a quiet presence, a bridge between father and son, it wasn't. It was simply dinner. 3 people sharing a meal. Nothing more, nothing less. After a while, Rosa spoke. She didn't address the elephant in the room, didn't mention school or guns or therapy or anything heavy. She simply told a story about her day, about how she'd been cleaning the library and found a book that had fallen behind the shelf, a photo album from years ago. There were pictures of a little boy playing soccer, she said, glancing at Marcus. He looked very happy. Very fast. Were you fast? Marcus looked up, surprised to be addressed so casually. He nodded slightly. I played forward. Rosa smiled. My son David played soccer too. Defense. He was always getting red cards for being too aggressive. Used to drive his coach crazy. Marcus's lips twitched, almost a smile. What position did he play? Rosa blinked. I just said defense. But he wanted to be a striker. Thought it was more exciting. Marcus actually spoke then, his voice soft but present. Defense is important though. You can't win if you can't stop the other team from scoring. Rosa nodded seriously. That's very wise. You should tell David that. He never appreciated his position. Richard sat frozen, watching this exchange. His son was talking. Actually engaging in conversation. About soccer, of all things. Something so normal, so mundane, so blessedly ordinary. He wanted to jump in, to join the conversation, but he was afraid of breaking whatever spell Rosa had woven. So he just listened, his food forgotten, his entire being focused on the sound of his son's voice. The dinner lasted 40 minutes. It was the longest Marcus had been in anyone's presence besides his own since the expulsion. When it ended, Marcus stood quietly and took his plate to the kitchen. Thank you, he murmured to Rosa. She touched his shoulder briefly. Anytime, Marcus. Anytime. The boy went upstairs. Richard and Rosa remained at the table, the silence now heavy with unspoken gratitude. Richard's eyes were wet. Thank you, he said. I don't know how you did that, but thank you. Rosa began clearing dishes. I didn't do anything special. I just talked to him like a person instead of a problem. Richard helped her carry dishes to the kitchen, something he'd probably never done before in his own home. As they loaded the dishwasher, he spoke quietly. The therapists all said he needed time, space, professional intervention. They made it sound so complicated. Rosa rinsed a plate. Sometimes the most complicated problems have the simplest solutions. Your son doesn't need someone to analyze him. He needs someone to see him. To remember he's still a child who likes soccer and has opinions about defensive positions. Richard leaned against the counter, exhaustion written in every line of his face. I've forgotten how to be his father. I've been so focused on fixing him that I stopped just being with him. Rosa didn't respond immediately. She finished loading the dishes, dried her hands on a towel, then turned to face him. Mr. Hale, may I be honest with you? Richard nodded. I think you need to stop trying so hard. Stop scheduling therapy and interventions and solutions. Just be present. Sit with him. Read to him if he wants. Watch television together. Play a board game. Do normal things. Let him be a child instead of a patient. It sounds too simple, Richard said. The best things usually are. But simple doesn't mean easy. It means you have to show up, consistently, even when it's uncomfortable. Even when he doesn't respond. Even when you feel like you're failing. You have to keep showing up. Richard absorbed this. Then he asked something that had been bothering him since their conversation that morning. "Why are you helping us? You barely know us. You could just do your job and go home. Why do you care so much?" Rosa was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "When I was on that bridge, thinking about jumping, a stranger stopped. Just some man walking his dog. He didn't know me. He had no reason to care. But he stopped and asked if I was okay. And even though I lied and said I was fine, the fact that he asked, that he saw me and cared enough to check, it made a difference. It reminded me that I mattered to someone, even a stranger. So when I see someone else on their own bridge, I stop. I ask if they're okay. Because maybe it will make the same difference for them that it made for me." Richard felt something shift inside him. This woman, this housekeeper who took 2 buses and a train to get to work every day, who earned in a month what he spent on a business dinner, had more wisdom and compassion than anyone he'd met in his privileged, insulated world. She had survived real hardship and come through it with her humanity intact, which was more than he could say for himself. He wanted to say something profound, to express the depth of his gratitude, but the words wouldn't come. So he just said, "Thank you, Rosa. For stopping. For asking if we're okay. Even though we're not." Rosa offered a tired smile. "You will be. It takes time, but you will be." That night, Richard didn't go to his study. He didn't open his laptop or check his phone or review reports. Instead, he went upstairs and did something he hadn't done since Marcus was small. He knocked on his son's door and asked, "Can I come in?" There was a long pause. Then a quiet voice. "Okay." Richard opened the door. Marcus was in bed, but not asleep. He was staring at the ceiling, his face illuminated by the blue glow of his nightlight. Richard sat down on the edge of the bed, his hands clasped between his knees. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. "I don't know how to help you. I don't know the right things to say. I just know I love you and I'm sorry I haven't been here the way I should have been." Marcus didn't respond. But he didn't turn away either. Richard took a shaky breath. "Your mom would know what to do. She always knew. She was the one who could reach you when you were upset or scared. I was always better with numbers and spreadsheets than emotions. But she's not here, and I'm all you have, so I'm trying. I'm trying to be better. I'm trying to be the father you deserve." Marcus's voice was barely audible. "I miss her." "I know," Richard whispered. "I miss her too. Every single day." Marcus turned to look at him. His eyes were wet. Why did she have to die? Richard felt his own tears fall. He'd been asked that question before, by therapists, by well-meaning friends, and he'd always deflected with logical answers about illness and fate and the unpredictability of life. But looking at his son now, he realized Marcus didn't want logic. He wanted truth. "I don't know," Richard said. "I've asked myself that same question 1,000 times. It's not fair. It's not right. And I'm so angry at the universe for taking her from us. From you. You needed her. You still need her. And she's not here, and that's the worst thing in the world." Marcus sat up, his face crumpling. "I can't do this without her, Dad. I can't." Richard did something then that he hadn't done since the funeral. He pulled his son into his arms and held him while Marcus finally broke open. The boy sobbed against his father's chest, great heaving cries that seemed to come from the deepest part of his soul, all the grief and rage and terror he'd been holding inside for 2 years. Richard held him and cried too, both of them clinging to each other in the darkness, 2 people who had been drowning separately now drowning together, and somehow that made it more bearable. They stayed like that for a long time. When the tears finally subsided, Marcus didn't pull away. He stayed close, his head resting against his father's shoulder. "Dad?" "Yeah?" Marcus's voice was small. "I wasn't going to hurt anyone at school. I know. The gun was for me. I know that too." Richard felt his heart crack. "I'm glad you didn't use it." I'm so glad you're still here. Marcus was quiet. Then he said, Rosa told me something today. What did she tell you? That you're scared of losing me. That you love me but don't know how to show it. Richard closed his eyes. She's right. I am scared. Terrified. You're all I have left of your mom. You're the most important thing in my entire world. And I've been so afraid of doing the wrong thing, of making it worse, that I ended up doing nothing. Which was the worst thing I could have done. Marcus shifted slightly. She said you look at my door when you think nobody's watching. Like you're trying to hold on to something precious that's slipping away. Richard's throat tightened. I do. Every day. I stand outside your door and want so desperately to come in, to talk to you, to hold you. But I didn't know if you wanted me there. I was afraid you blamed me for not being able to save Mom. Or that you hated me for being alive when she's not. Marcus pulled back to look at his father. I don't hate you. I'm just sad. All the time. So sad I can't breathe sometimes. Richard cupped his son's face in his hands. I know. I feel that way too. And we're going to figure out how to live with this sadness together. Not make it go away, because I don't think it ever really goes away. But we'll learn to carry it. We'll help each other. The next morning, Richard did something he hadn't done in over 2 years. He called his assistant and told her to clear his schedule for the week. All of it. The meetings. The conference calls. Everything. She sputtered in confusion. But Mr. Hale, the investor's presentation is Thursday and the Tokyo launch is Friday, and Richard cut her off. I have something more important to do. Reschedule everything. She wanted to argue. She wanted to remind him about obligations and responsibilities and the dozen people counting on him. But something in his voice stopped her. Yes, sir. When Rosa arrived that morning, Richard was in the kitchen making breakfast. Or attempting to. He'd burned the toast and the eggs were questionable, but he was trying. Rosa paused in the doorway, surprised. Mr. Hale? Good morning, he said, scraping burned bread into the trash. I'm taking the week off. I thought maybe Marcus and I could do some things together. Maybe you could help me figure out what those things should be? Rosa smiled. That's a good start. What does Marcus like to do? Richard realized he didn't know. Not anymore. Before Catherine died, Marcus had loved building things, working with his hands, creating elaborate structures. But Richard had no idea if that was still true. I should ask him, shouldn't I? Rosa nodded. That's exactly what you should do. That afternoon, Richard knocked on Marcus's door again. Want to go somewhere with me? Marcus appeared, cautious. Where? Richard shrugged. I don't know yet. Where do you want to go? Marcus looked confused by the question. Like he'd forgotten that his preferences mattered, that he had agency over his own life. After a moment, he said quietly, there's a science museum downtown. With an engineering exhibit. We used to go there with Mom sometimes. Richard's heart ached at the mention of Catherine, but he didn't let it show. The science museum sounds perfect. Let's go. They took Richard's car, just the two of them. Thomas had the day off. Richard drove, and Marcus sat in the passenger seat, looking out the window at the city passing by. They didn't talk much. The silence was still there, but it felt different now. Less heavy. More like two people comfortable enough with each other to not need constant conversation. The museum was mostly empty on a weekday afternoon. They wandered through exhibits about physics and robotics and space exploration. Marcus stopped at the engineering section, where kids could build bridges with different materials and test their weight tolerance. He picked up some pieces, his hands moving with muscle memory, building something without thinking about it. Richard watched, fascinated. He'd forgotten how talented Marcus was at this, how naturally the design came to him. Look, Marcus said, and Richard realized it was the first time in weeks his son had voluntarily shown him something. He'd built a suspension bridge, elegant and sturdy. When they added weights to test it, the bridge held firm. "That's incredible," Richard said, genuine admiration in his voice. "You're really good at this." Marcus ducked his head, embarrassed but pleased. "Mom used to say I got it from you. That I have an engineer's brain." Richard felt emotion swell in his chest. She was right. "You do." They spent 2 hours at the museum. They built structures and watched demonstrations and read informational plaques. Normal things. Father and son things. Things they should have been doing all along. When they left, Marcus looked more alive than Richard had seen him in months. There was color in his cheeks. A lightness in his step. On the drive home, Marcus spoke suddenly. "Dad?" "Yeah? Can we come back here sometime? Maybe next week?" Richard felt his eyes burn. "We can come back whenever you want. We can come back every week if you want to." Marcus nodded, satisfied. He turned to look out the window, a small smile on his face. And Richard realized that healing wasn't going to happen all at once. It wasn't going to be a single breakthrough moment. It was going to be this. Small trips. Tiny smiles. Moments of connection built carefully, one at a time, until someday the weight of grief became something they could carry without being crushed by it. When they arrived home, Rosa was in the living room organizing books. She looked up when they entered and saw Marcus's face, saw the subtle change in his demeanor, and her eyes met Richard's with understanding. "How was the museum?" she asked. "It was good," Marcus said. "We built bridges." Rosa smiled. "That sounds wonderful. Maybe you can show me what you learned later." Marcus nodded and headed upstairs. Richard watched him go, then turned to Rosa. "Thank you." "For what?" "For reminding me how to be his father." Rosa shook her head. "You always knew how. You just forgot for a while. Fear does that. Makes us forget who we are. But you're remembering now." Richard sat down on the stairs, suddenly exhausted. "This is going to be a long road, isn't it?" Rosa sat beside him, not too close but close enough. "It is. But you're not walking it alone anymore. That makes all the difference." Richard looked at this woman who had appeared in his life 2 weeks ago and somehow become essential. "Who are you really?" he asked. Rosa laughed softly. "I'm nobody special, Mr. Hale. Just a mother who understands what it means to hold your child's pain and wish you could take it from them. Just a person who has been broken and learned how to put herself back together. Just someone who believes that everybody deserves a second chance at finding joy." That night, the three of them had dinner together again. This time, the conversation flowed more easily. Marcus told Rosa about the museum, his words coming faster, his eyes brighter. Rosa asked questions, engaged him, drew him out. Richard added comments here and there, but mostly he just listened, grateful beyond words for this simple, ordinary moment. After dinner, Marcus asked if they could watch a movie. Richard almost said no, that he had work to catch up on, but he stopped himself. He'd promised to be present. Work could wait. They settled in the home theater, the three of them. Rosa tried to excuse herself, but Marcus asked her to stay. "Please. I want to show you my favorite movie." Rosa looked at Richard, who nodded. "Please stay." So she did. They watched an animated film about a robot learning to love. Marcus sat between them, occasionally commenting on his favorite parts. And when the emotional climax came, when the robot sacrificed himself for his friends, Marcus's eyes filled with tears. But this time, he didn't hide them. He let them fall. And when the robot came back, when love proved stronger than death, Marcus smiled through his tears. Richard looked past his son to Rosa, who was also wiping her eyes. Their gazes met and held. In that moment, Richard understood something profound. This woman wasn't just helping his son heal. She was helping him heal too. She was teaching them both how to feel again, how to be vulnerable, how to sit with pain without being destroyed by it. She was showing them, through her quiet presence and simple wisdom, that life could still be beautiful even after terrible loss. That love didn't end when someone died. It transformed, changed shape, found new expressions. And that maybe, just maybe, they could build something new from the broken pieces of what they'd lost. The movie ended. Marcus yawned, the first sign of genuine tiredness rather than emotional exhaustion Richard had seen in weeks. "I'm going to bed," Marcus announced. "Good night." "Good night," Richard and Rosa said in unison. Marcus paused at the door and looked back. "Today was a good day," he said simply. Then he was gone. Richard and Rosa sat in the dimming light of the theater, the credits rolling on the screen. "That was the first time he said that," Richard murmured. "That something was good." Rosa stood, gathering empty popcorn bowls. "Then it's a very good day indeed." Richard walked her to the kitchen, unwilling to let the moment end. He watched her rinse the bowls, efficient and unhurried. "Rosa?" She looked over her shoulder. "What would you say if I told you I wanted to hire you full-time? Not just as a housekeeper, but as someone who could be here for Marcus. Help him continue healing." Rosa turned off the water. "With respect, Mr. Hale, I don't think Marcus needs an employee. He needs family." Richard nodded slowly. "You're right. What if I asked you to be part of our family? Not as an employee, but as someone who belongs here. Someone who matters to us." Rosa dried her hands carefully, not meeting his eyes. "Mr. Hale, I have my own family. A husband. 2 children. A life outside these walls. I can be here during the day, can continue helping Marcus, but I can't replace what you've lost. I'm not his mother. I'm not your wife." Richard felt his face flush. "I'm not asking you to replace Catherine. I could never ask that. I'm just saying that you've made a difference here. A profound one. And I don't want to lose that. I don't want Marcus to lose that." Rosa looked at him then, really looked at him, and Richard saw understanding in her eyes. And maybe something else. Something warm and complicated and a little bit frightening. "I'll be here," she said quietly. "As much as I can be. For as long as you need me. But you need to understand something, Mr. Hale. The healing that's happening, it's not because of me. It's because you finally showed up. You finally let yourself be vulnerable with your son. You finally chose him over your work, over your fear, over everything else. I just helped you remember how." Richard felt the truth of her words settle into his bones. She was right. He'd been hiding behind work, behind solutions, behind anything that would let him avoid the terrible intimacy of grief. But these last few days, sitting with Marcus, being present in his pain, it had changed something fundamental. He was still scared. Still sad. Still scarred by loss. But he was learning to live with it instead of running from it. "Thank you," he said again, inadequate words for an immeasurable gift. Rosa smiled. "Get some rest, Mr. Hale. Tomorrow is another day to show up for your son. And you will. I believe that now." She gathered her things and headed toward the door. Richard watched her go, this ordinary woman who had walked into his broken life and taught him how to be human again. Just before she left, she turned back. "Mr. Hale?" He looked up. "Call me Richard. When we're not around others, just Richard." She nodded slowly. "Then call me Rosa. Not the housekeeper. Not the help. Just Rosa." "Deal," he said. Rosa smiled and disappeared into the night. Richard stood alone in his kitchen, in his enormous empty mansion that suddenly felt a little less empty, a little less haunted. He went upstairs and paused outside Marcus's door. He could hear his son breathing, slow and steady. Actually asleep instead of lying awake tormented by nightmares. Richard pressed his palm against the door, a blessing and a promise. Tomorrow he would show up again. And the day after that. And the day after that. For as long as it took. for however many tomorrows it took to help his son find his way back to life. Because Rosa was right. Love didn't end when someone died. It transformed. And maybe, just maybe, he was learning how to love in this new shape, this new form, this life that would never be what it was but could still become something worth living. 3 months passed like water finding its level, settling into new patterns that felt less like survival and more like actual living. Marcus returned to therapy, but this time with Dr. Sarah Kim, a child psychologist who understood that sometimes healing required more than clinical techniques. She worked with the whole family, teaching Richard how to communicate, showing Marcus tools to manage overwhelming emotions, creating space for grief without letting it consume everything. The sessions were hard. There were setbacks. Days when Marcus withdrew again, when the darkness crept back and threatened to swallow him whole. But Richard was there now. Present. Patient. Learning that being a father meant sitting with discomfort, holding space for pain without trying to immediately fix it. Rosa came 5 days a week, arriving early and staying late, becoming woven into the fabric of their daily existence. She cooked meals that filled the house with warmth. She listened when Marcus needed to talk about his mother, sharing her own stories of loss without making it about herself. She reminded Richard to eat, to sleep, to take care of himself so he could take care of his son. The household staff noticed the change. Mrs. Chen remarked that the house felt alive again, that laughter had returned to rooms that had been silent tombs. Thomas mentioned that Marcus had started greeting him in the mornings, asking about his grandchildren. James said the boy had begun helping in the gardens, getting dirt under his fingernails, showing interest in growing things. But it was the quiet moments that revealed the deepest transformation. Richard and Marcus playing chess in the library, neither of them very good but both of them trying. Marcus showing his father drawings he'd made in therapy, illustrations of his feelings rendered in color and shape. Richard reading to his son at night, not because Marcus couldn't read himself but because it was something they could share, a ritual that made them both feel connected. These weren't dramatic breakthroughs. They were small stitches, mending torn fabric thread by thread until the tears became less visible, less raw. On a Saturday in late January, Marcus had a moment that changed everything. Richard was working in his study when Marcus appeared in the doorway, holding something behind his back. His face held that mixture of nervousness and excitement that children get when they have something important to share. "Dad?" Richard looked up from his laptop, giving his son his complete attention, something that had become habit now. "Yeah, buddy." Marcus brought his hands forward, revealing a carefully wrapped package. "It's your birthday. I made you something." Richard had completely forgotten his own birthday. For the past 2 years, the date had passed unmarked, just another day in an endless string of days. But Marcus had remembered. Had created something. Had cared enough to acknowledge it. Richard's hands shook as he opened the package. Inside was a wooden picture frame, hand-carved with intricate patterns. The craftsmanship was remarkable, detailed work that must have taken weeks. Inside the frame was a photograph Richard had never seen before, one Marcus must have found in Catherine's things. It showed the three of them at the lake, summer sun golden on their faces, Catherine laughing at something Richard had said, Marcus grinning between them, small and perfect and whole. "I made the frame in shop class," Marcus explained quietly. "Before everything happened. I was going to give it to you last year but then I got expelled and I forgot about it. But Rosa helped me finish it. She said everyone deserves to remember the good times, not just the sad ones." Richard couldn't speak. He pulled Marcus into a fierce hug, the frame pressed between them. "Thank you," he managed. "This is the best gift anyone has ever given me." Marcus hugged him back, no longer stiff or reluctant but genuine. "I miss her every day," Marcus whispered. "But I'm starting to remember the happy parts too. Not just the hospital and the funeral. I remember how she used to sing off-key when she cooked. How she always let me lick the spoon when she made brownies. How she called me her little engineer." Richard's tears fell into his son's hair. "She would be so proud of you. So proud of how brave you've been." Marcus pulled back, his own eyes wet but clear. Do you think she knows? That we're okay now? Richard touched his son's face gently. I think if love can survive death, then she knows. And I think she's glad we found our way back to each other. That afternoon, Rosa found Richard sitting in the kitchen, the frame on the table before him, tears still on his face but a smile there too. He looked up when she entered. You helped him with this. Rosa nodded, putting groceries away. He worked very hard on it. Wanted it to be perfect for you. Richard studied the photograph, the three of them frozen in a moment of pure joy. I've been so focused on the loss that I forgot we had years of happiness before. That those years still matter. Still count. Rosa sat down across from him. Loss has a way of eating everything if you let it. But Marcus is learning to hold both things at once. The grief and the gratitude. That's real healing. Richard looked at her. You've given us so much. I don't know how to repay that. Rosa shook her head. You don't repay love, Richard. You just pass it forward. The moment hung between them, charged with something neither of them wanted to name. Richard had been feeling it for weeks now, an awareness of Rosa that went beyond gratitude. The way her presence made him feel grounded. How her laugh could lighten even his darkest moods. The warmth in his chest when she smiled. But he also knew the complications. The differences in their worlds. The fact that she was married, had her own family. That she worked for him. That pursuing anything beyond friendship would be inappropriate at best, destructive at worst. So he said nothing. Just let the feeling exist without acting on it. Rosa seemed to sense his thoughts. She stood, busying herself with dinner preparations. How is the company? Getting back to normal? Richard shrugged. Define normal. The board wants me more present, but I've made it clear that Marcus comes first now. Some of them don't like it, but they'll adjust. Rosa chopped vegetables with practiced efficiency. And you? Are you adjusting? To this new version of your life? Richard considered the question. I'm trying. Some days are harder than others. I still wake up at 3 in the morning sometimes, panicking about whether I'm doing enough, whether Marcus will be okay. But then I remember what you said about showing up. That I don't have to be perfect. I just have to be present. Rosa nodded. Perfection is overrated anyway. Presence is what matters. They worked together in comfortable silence, preparing dinner as they had dozens of times now. It had become their routine, this shared task that wasn't really about food but about companionship. About two people who had helped each other through darkness, finding peace in the ordinary rituals of daily life. That evening brought unexpected visitors. Rosa's husband Miguel and their children Elena and David arrived at the mansion's gate, looking uncertain and out of place. Rosa had called them earlier, inviting them for dinner, wanting her two worlds to meet. Richard had encouraged it, curious about the family that had shaped this remarkable woman. Miguel was a compact man with weathered hands and a quiet dignity. Elena had her mother's eyes and warmth. David was tall and serious, protective of his family. They sat at the dining table, the space feeling less cavernous with more people filling it. Richard had worried it might be awkward, this collision of vastly different lives. But Marcus, surprisingly, drew David into conversation about soccer. Elena asked about the house's architecture, genuinely interested. Miguel spoke little but observed everything with intelligent eyes. Rosa moved between kitchen and table, making sure everyone had what they needed, her face glowing with the particular happiness of having her loved ones together. Richard watched her and understood something fundamental. This was where she belonged, surrounded by family, needed and cherished. He was grateful to be included in this moment, but he also recognized that he was peripheral to her real life. After dinner, Marcus asked David if he wanted to see his room, his engineering projects. The teenagers disappeared upstairs. Elena helped clear dishes. Miguel stepped outside for air. Richard found himself alone with Rosa in the kitchen. "Your family is wonderful," he said. "You must be very proud." Rosa smiled. They're everything to me. The reason I get up every morning. The reason I kept going when things were hard. Richard understood what she was really saying. That whatever connection existed between them, it could never supersede her primary commitments. That she had helped the Hales heal, but her own heart belonged elsewhere. It should have hurt. Maybe it did, a little. But mostly Richard felt grateful. Grateful that someone so rooted in love and loyalty had chosen to share some of that light with his broken family. You're a good man, Richard, Rosa said quietly. You've become the father Marcus needs. The person Catherine would have wanted you to be. Don't lose sight of that just because I won't always be here. Richard's throat tightened. You're leaving? Rosa shook her head. Not yet. But eventually, yes. Marcus is healing. You're healing. Soon you won't need me the way you do now. And when that time comes, you'll be ready. You'll both be ready. Richard wanted to argue. Wanted to say they would always need her. But he recognized the truth in her words. She had been the bridge that carried them from desperation to hope. But bridges were meant to be crossed, not lived on. Their job was to reach the other side and learn to stand on solid ground again. Okay, he said simply. But until then, you're stuck with us. Rosa laughed. I can think of worse places to be stuck. Miguel returned, and they all gathered in the living room. Marcus and David came back downstairs debating something about World Cup statistics. Elena showed Rosa photos on her phone from nursing school. The evening felt warm, normal, like something a real family might do. Not perfect, but genuine. When Rosa's family prepared to leave, Marcus hugged Rosa goodbye with unself-conscious affection. Thank you for dinner. Thank you for everything. Rosa kissed the top of his head. Anytime, mi amor. You take care of your father, okay? Marcus nodded seriously. I will. After they left, Richard and Marcus stood in the doorway watching the taillights disappear. She's special, isn't she? Marcus said. Very special, Richard agreed. We're lucky she found us. Marcus looked up at his father. Do you love her? The question was direct, without judgment, just curiosity. Richard considered how to answer honestly without burdening his son with adult complications. I care about her deeply. She helped us when we were lost. But she has her own life, her own family. Our job is to be grateful for what she's given us and to honor that by continuing to heal. Marcus processed this. So we're going to be okay? Even when she's not here anymore? Richard put his arm around his son's shoulders. We're going to be okay. Because she taught us how to be okay. How to show up for each other. How to hold grief without letting it destroy us. Those lessons don't disappear when she does. Months continued passing. Spring arrived with Green returning to the gardens. Marcus started attending a new school, a smaller private academy with a counselor who specialized in trauma. He made friends slowly, cautiously, but genuinely. His nightmares became less frequent. His smile came easier. Richard restructured his work life, delegating more, working from home several days a week, prioritizing differently. The company adapted. The board grumbled but saw that Richard was actually more effective when not stretched impossibly thin. Rosa gradually reduced her hours as Marcus needed less intensive support. 4 days a week became 3, then 2. The transitions were handled carefully, ensuring Marcus felt secure. Mrs. Chen resumed more household duties. Rosa's role shifted from necessity to welcomed presence. On a warm day in May, Rosa arrived to find Marcus in the garden with Richard, both of them planting tomatoes. They looked up when she approached, faces dirty, grins matching. We're growing our own food, Marcus announced proudly. Dad's terrible at it but I'm teaching him. Richard laughed. It's true. Turns out running a tech company doesn't qualify you for gardening. Rosa knelt beside them, showing them the proper depth for planting. Her hands moved with practiced knowledge, gentle and sure. This was her gift, Richard realized. Not just wisdom about grief or healing, but the ability to find joy in simple things. To recognize that life happened in small moments, not grand gestures. As summer approached, Rosa told them she was reducing to 1 day a week. Elena was graduating, and Rosa wanted more time with her family. Marcus handled the news with maturity that showed how far he'd come. "I understand," he said. "But can you still come for dinner sometimes? Just to visit?" Rosa hugged him. "Wild horses couldn't keep me away. You're part of my heart now, Marcus. Both of you are." Richard felt the bittersweet ache of necessary endings. He'd known this was coming but hadn't prepared for how much it would hurt. Not because he needed her professionally anymore. They'd long since moved past that. But because she'd become integral to their lives in ways that transcended employment. On her last official day, Rosa arrived to find the house decorated with flowers. Marcus had made a banner reading "Thank you, Rosa" with careful lettering. Richard had prepared a photo album chronicling their journey, pictures of dinners and outings, moments of healing captured in images. They gave her gifts, heartfelt tokens of appreciation. But the real gift was what she saw when she looked at them. Father and son standing together, healthy and whole and connected. No longer drowning but swimming. No longer lost but found. "This," Rosa said, her voice thick with emotion, "this is what I'll remember. Not the house or anything material. But the way you both came back to life. The way you learned to love each other through the grief instead of in spite of it." Marcus cried, no longer ashamed of tears. Richard embraced Rosa, holding on perhaps a moment longer than appropriate, then letting go. "Thank you," he said simply. "For seeing us when we couldn't see ourselves." Rosa touched both their faces, a blessing and farewell. "Keep showing up for each other. That's all life asks. Keep showing up." They walked her to her car. She drove away, and Richard and Marcus stood watching until she disappeared. Then Marcus took his father's hand, something he hadn't done since being small. "We're going to be okay, aren't we, Dad?" Richard squeezed his son's hand. "We already are, buddy. We already are." Life continued. Rosa visited sometimes, always welcomed, always cherished. She attended Marcus's school performances and birthday celebrations. She remained connected but separate, present but not intrusive. Her own life flourished. Elena graduated and became a nurse. David got into college. Miguel's business expanded. And the Hales healed. Not perfectly. Not completely. Scars remained. Some days were still hard. But they'd learned to carry their grief with grace, to honor Catherine's memory by living fully, by choosing connection over isolation. A year after Rosa first walked through their door, Richard and Marcus visited Catherine's grave together. They brought flowers and sat talking to her, sharing updates about their lives, telling her about the people who'd helped them survive. Marcus told his mother about his new school, his friends, his engineering projects. Richard told her about letting go of impossible standards, about learning that strength sometimes looked like vulnerability. And they both told her about Rosa, the unexpected angel who'd appeared when they needed her most, who'd taught them that healing was possible even when it seemed impossible. As they walked back to the car, Marcus said, "I think Mom would have liked Rosa." Richard nodded. "I think they would have been friends." They drove home through golden afternoon light, windows down, music playing. The mansion appeared on the hill, no longer a mausoleum but a home. Inside, Mrs. Chin had prepared dinner. Thomas was trimming hedges. James was planting flowers. Life happening in all its ordinary beauty. That evening, Richard tucked Marcus into bed, a ritual they'd maintained even as Marcus grew older. "Good night, buddy. Sweet dreams." "Dad?" "Yeah? I'm glad we didn't give up." "Me too, son. Me too." Richard turned out the light and paused in the doorway, looking back at his son's silhouette. The same boy who'd brought a gun to school 18 months ago. The same boy who'd wanted to stop existing because the pain was too much. Now sleeping peacefully, dreaming whatever 11-year-old boys dream, safe and loved and whole. Richard went downstairs to his study. He looked at the photo frame Marcus had made, the image of their family when life was simple and joy came easily. But beside it now sat another photo. Marcus and Richard at the Science Museum, both grinning, both present, both alive in every sense of the word. 2 pictures. 2 versions of their family. Both real. Both true. Both worthy of remembering. Richard understood now what Rosa had been teaching them all along. That love doesn't end when someone dies. It transforms. It finds new expressions, new forms, new ways to sustain and nurture. Catherine's love lived on in Marcus's engineering mind, in Richard's newfound ability to be vulnerable, in the lessons they'd learned about showing up even when everything hurt. And Rosa's love, the love of a stranger who'd stopped on their bridge and asked if they were okay, that lived on too. In their healed hearts. In their restored connection. In their ability to face tomorrow without fear. Richard closed his laptop. He didn't need to work tonight. Didn't need to hide in spreadsheets and reports. He went to the living room where photos lined the walls. Catherine smiling. Marcus laughing. Images of a life that had been broken but not destroyed. Interrupted but not ended. He thought about Rosa, probably home now with her own family, her own joys and struggles. He hoped she knew how profoundly she'd changed them. How completely she'd saved them. Not through grand gestures or dramatic interventions. But through simple presence. Through showing them that healing happened in ordinary moments. In shared meals. In honest conversations. In the decision to keep showing up, day after day, even when hope seemed impossible. The house settled into nighttime quiet. Richard made his rounds, checking doors, turning off lights. He paused outside Marcus's room, listening to his son's steady breathing. Alive. Here. Healing. Richard pressed his palm against the door, that familiar gesture of blessing and promise. Then he went to his own room, to his own bed, and for the first time in years, he didn't dread tomorrow. He welcomed it. Because tomorrow meant another day with his son. Another chance to be present. Another opportunity to choose life over grief, connection over isolation, hope over despair. He fell asleep thinking about second chances. About bridges that appeared when you needed them most. About strangers who became family. About love in all its transformations. And about the simple, profound truth that sometimes the greatest act of courage is just showing up. Consistently. Honestly. Completely. Day after ordinary day, until the darkness recedes and the light returns and you realize you're not just surviving anymore. You're living. Really living. And that's worth everything. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.